Hi, my name is Gabe Newell, and welcome to Left 4 Dead. Left 4 Dead is our first attempt to combine the strengths of single-player and multiplayer games. We wanted to take the character-driven storytelling of our single-player games, like Half-Life, and combine it with the social replayability of our multiplayer games, like Counter-Strike and Team Fortress 2. Plus, Left 4 Dead has zombie hordes and co-op, so what's not to like? To listen to a commentary node, put your crosshair over the floating commentary symbol and press your use key. To stop a commentary node, put your crosshair over the rotating node and press the use key again. Some commentary nodes may take control of the game in order to show something to you. In these cases, simply press your use key again to stop the commentary. Please let me know what you think after you've had a chance to play Left 4 Dead. I can be reached at GabeN@valvesoftware.com. I get about 10,000 emails each time we release a game, and while I can't respond to all of them, I do read all of them. Thanks, and have fun.
Originally in Left 4 Dead, there were some features that made it possible for players to cause trouble for others. This behavior, known as griefing, can really ruin the experience of a game, especially for newer players. For instance, at this starting location, while players were still getting used to the controls, other players might push them off the roof and cause them to fall and die before the game really even gets started. This is one of the main reasons we changed the survivors' behavior so they could no longer push each other.
We experimented with a variety of different introductions for each campaign. For No Mercy, we tried a 40-second fly-in of the helicopter to give the player a more movie-like introduction to the game. Ultimately, we found that such elaborate cutscenes are hard to watch over and over in a game that's built for replayability. Playtesters wanted to get into the game and start playing right away, so we ended up going with a much more streamlined game intro.
While we were developing bots for Counter-Strike Source, we discovered that a few of us armed to the teeth with automatic weaponry against 30 knife-wielding enemy bots was a lot of fun. After shipping Counter-Strike Source in late 2004, we started experimenting with new game prototypes. That basic kernel of small team of friends against hordes of clawing enemies was something we kept coming back to, and we soon realized that the co-op versus the horde game had a ton of potential. We started work in earnest on what was to become Left 4 Dead in early 2005, and in about a week we had a very rough but very playable and fun prototype. We began our daily cycle of playtest, discuss, and modify that continued for the next 3 years. Left 4 Dead is the result of this evolutionary design process.
I think we should go.
Right behind you.
We treat the infected horde as a major character in Left 4 Dead and spend a lot of effort in making their movements believable. This includes hundreds of motion-captured animations that are algorithmically blended with the physics system to create characters that realistically interact with their environment and each other. Common hordes stagger around, cough, vomit, fight amongst themselves, lean against walls, sit on the ground, and lie down as part of their wandering behaviors. If something wakes them from their stupor, they become alert and look around for the source of the disturbance. When they see a survivor, they become enraged and acquire that survivor as a target, taking off at a full sprint, leaning into their turns, jumping and climbing over everything in their way, trying to get to their victim. We wanted to express this rage in their faces as well, so we found efficient ways for each member of the horde to make intense facial expressions. We chose to make their eyes a solid milky white, partially because it looks creepy and disturbing, but also because it's much less expensive than drawing and controlling separate eyeballs for each infected.
The most common attitude toward music in multiplayer games is that it just gets in the way. We wanted the music in Left 4 Dead to heighten the key emotional elements that should be inherent in a horror game, keeping in mind that everything in a game should contribute to gameplay. Therefore, we made a simple set of goals that the music should meet to keep people from turning it off. Players who leave the music on are treated to a variety of subtle audio cues that not only deepen the horror experience, but make them better players.
Once the game is in a playable state, we bring in friends and family who've never played the game to playtest specific areas, maps, or campaigns. These players bring a fresh perspective and objectivity to the game experience that often gives us new insights into what's working and what's not in our games. We observe their play and experience their exhilarations and frustrations. While playing, we encourage them to talk and ask questions to get a better idea of what they're thinking, though we let them know that we won't be able to answer any of those questions or offer any help. Watching these playtests helps us to tune the game so that the first-time players understand the game mechanics and the basic premise for how the game is played, and that we're achieving the right balance of challenges and rewards. After the play session is complete, there's a final Q&A session where we ask them about their experience to gain more specific insight than we were able to obtain through observation. One approach we use here is to ask them what the best and worst moments of the experience were for them and why. This is especially useful feedback to help us identify and prioritize our key issues in improving the game experience.
The designs of the boss infected were driven directly from weaknesses observed during our daily playtesting. For example, in the very early days of the game, there were only common infected. As a result, the survivors had a very simple rule of shoot everything that moves. Although this was fun, it lacked tactical depth and variety. The boomer's goal was to shake this simple rule up a bit, and he became the zombie that you do not want to shoot. Originally, the boomer just exploded when shot, instantly dealing a lot of damage to everyone nearby, or even the whole team if someone made a bad decision in close quarters. The boomer didn't yet have his vomit attack. That horde drawing ability belonged to the screamer. As the design of the game continued to evolve, the screamer was cut, and this horde attracting ability was transferred to the boomer's vomit attack. This attack fit the hugely obese and gluttonous visual design of the boomer well. Once the boomer could vomit, we realized that this was a much more interesting game mechanic and changed the explosion from an instantaneous damage-causing one into the current vomit-splattering one. The boomer's vomit has a couple of very interesting game mechanics. Along with being temporarily blinded with vomit in their eyes, whoever is hit by the vomit becomes it, and the incoming horde of zombies only attacks that player, essentially leaving him to the mercy of his teammates' willingness to protect him. The other players who have not been vomited on have to make a quick decision about how to deal with this new situation. Another feature of the vomit attack is that it is not an instantaneous blow that causes damage, unlike the previous exploding version of the boomer. Instead, there are often several seconds of dread and anticipation where the player knows the horde is coming and can prepare for the onslaught, but there's uncertainty about how things are going to play out. This kind of anticipatory drama is amazingly powerful and makes the whole Left 4 Dead experience work well and keeps the players on their toes.
The Screamer was a boss zombie who didn't have any actual attacks. He was bound in a straitjacket. You knew when he was around because of his crazed, maniacal cackling. The trick to the Screamer was that if he saw you, you had a moment to kill him before he ran away. And once the Screamer got away from the survivors to a hiding place, he would emit a loud, howling scream that would cause a huge mob of zombies to attack the survivors. While there were several exciting moments of knowing you had to chase him down to shoot him before he screamed, dodging zombies all the way, ultimately it proved too confusing for the survivors to discover how he worked or even to reliably notice him in the crowd. He was cut, and his horde drawing attack eventually evolved into the boomer attack.
To overcome the horror and darkness of Left 4 Dead, our highest priority was to create 4 believable people for the survivors, which you could connect with. With the design of Francis, we were looking for a large, imposing character that would fit in well during the zombie apocalypse. He needed to feel huge, fit believably into the world, and read well as a silhouette. The biker look was a strong choice, as the read of bare arms, a stained white shirt, and leather waistcoat, all in a 6'5" frame, certainly made for an imposing pared-back shape that read clearly amongst the chaos. When dealing with an environment that is as dark as Left 4 Dead, a strong graphic read would be essential in combating the visual noise of hundreds of zombies frantically flailing about. The survivors are in effect visually our last hope and read as warm and enduring people in a world gone mad. The zombies, on the other hand, are desaturated, fairly cool in their colour palette, and lack a lot of the contrast of our survivors. The 4 characters were designed as a unit, so that while they stand out together from the rest of the world, their strong silhouettes and colour contrast provide clear reads for each individually, yet a signal team. We wanted to conjure 4 survivors that would resonate realistically, and thereby complete our horrifically rendered vision of the zombie apocalypse, which you, the player, now find yourself in.
To find a coherent visual look for Left 4 Dead, we first had to make choices that would help enhance gameplay in a very dark setting. The darkness is crucial to Left 4 Dead, as it forces players to stick together and encourages cooperative gameplay. We took advantage of lessons learned from our previous work on Team Fortress 2, particularly in regard to maintaining the readability of character silhouettes in a dark, chaotic environment.
Meanwhile, we studied film techniques that have been employed successfully in dark settings to address the unique challenges and opportunities in a highly dynamic game environment. To accentuate the notion that you're playing through the ultimate zombie movie with a band of your friends, we added various filmic effects to the source engine. Using these effects, including color correction, film grain, contrast, and vignetting, we were able to define a stylistic filmic look that balances a visual drama with clear readability for players.
When we started what was to become Left 4 Dead in late 2004, or Terror Strike as it was known at the time, our team was quite small. However, we knew we had certain strengths, one of them being AI. AI is just shorthand for software that results in apparently intelligent behavior, which can take many different forms. In our case, we wanted to explore procedural content generation, creating an AI algorithm that would generate endless amounts of content for players to consume. The advantages of this are many. Not only would the game be infinitely replayable, but we could theoretically create huge amounts of game experience with a small team and some clever programming. The reason we decided on a humans versus the zombie horde motif was that the actual core game mechanic, shoot lots of zombies, is kind of a known fun quantity. That allowed us to take more risk on the side of procedurally populating our zombie world, than to experiment with a procedural system that manipulates the dramatic pacing of the game. Taking this risk has really paid off so far. Not only do we, the dev team, still enjoy playing our game after doing so for 3 years, but the procedural population system has really saved a ton of effort. For example, if we tweak some portion of how the game plays, we only have to do it in one piece of code, which then automatically populates all 20 of our maps and all future maps we or our fans create in this new way.
Anyone designing a post-apocalyptic city has to deal with the problem of how to light it. Initially, our take on it was that the city still had power. You could see lights in many windows and the streetlights were all lit up. It didn't give us the atmosphere we wanted, but we felt we needed those light sources. When we started to unify the art and lighting design, one of the decisions was to eliminate a lot of lights. This gave us an opportunity to come up with other ways of bringing light into scenes. As we removed lights, we found we were also removing any sense of normality in the city. Without lit windows, or even the illuminated signage in front of stores, we removed some familiarity from the player's experience. Things are lit from lower angles than they would expect, from car headlights and oil barrel fires. These dramatic angles really enhance the sense of a creepy, desolate, almost hopeless environment. Now it's a city that you've seen, but not in a way that you've ever seen it before. Something's amiss, something's off.
Local contrast adjustment is another film effect we've implemented in Left 4 Dead. We control contrast dynamically keyed to peak events in the game. When everything suddenly gets sharper, this is a visual parallel to an adrenaline rush. We use contrast to emulate a heightened sense of awareness. While players may not be consciously aware of these effects, they eventually come to associate subtle changes in visual presentation with shifts in the game's intensity.
Buildings by nature tend to be pretty square, and if there's a well-lit building with a dark sky behind it, you clearly see the squareness of the building, no matter how many AC units, chimneys, or other interesting shapes are stuck on top of it. So what we did here was flip the typical lighting scheme and put a bright sky behind dark buildings. Suddenly, the pipes and chimneys blend into the building's silhouette. Now, instead of seeing individual details like the AC units, you're seeing a much more complex, organic-looking skyline in the background. And because the mind expects a similar level of detail throughout an object, your imagination fills in the detail in the dark areas of the building based on the silhouette.
Car alarms are an example of what we call panic events, brief, intense, and maybe avoidable moments. In the classic post-apocalyptic movie, car alarms go off, but there's nobody around to respond. It's just another sign of things having gone down the tubes. We initially put the car alarm cars in just as a cool effect. But when we hit on the idea of having the alarms call up a horde of infected, we knew we'd found the right use for the car alarms in the world of the game. It's really great when this kind of classic genre element can serve a gameplay purpose as well.
We might need these. We need to get going, guys.
I've got your back.
Early versions of Left 4 Dead allowed more skillful players to run off on their own without much fear of deadly consequences, bobbing and weaving around the infected before they could react. The addition of player slowdown, when hit by a common infected, severely reduced the player's ability to simply run straight through the horde. More importantly, the Hunter Pounce and Smoker Hang presented fatal situations for a player on his own. These additions instilled the fear of being alone in even the most seasoned of FPS players, reinforcing the value of tight teamwork.
I'm with you.
Through playtesting, we found that Left 4 Dead's unique cooperation mechanics were tricky even for seasoned gamers to grasp immediately. Failing because of rules that are not clear is never fun. Therefore, we designed the game instructor system to educate players as quickly as possible. Because first-time players can potentially join an in-progress game at any point, it was critical that the game instructor dynamically interpret game events. It keeps a running list of the lessons that can be taught in the current context and displays the ones that are most important. It also tracks how many times the player has successfully demonstrated that they've learned the lesson. Once the player has proven competence at any specific lesson, the hint is never shown again.
Molotovs over here!
Left 4 Dead evolved some of the contextual dialogue technology that we used in the Orange Box. Each survivor has a large database of lines to choose from based on their present activity and a variety of factors, such as their health, stress level, kinds of special infected seen so far, and many others. Each line can potentially trigger an automatic response from another character, allowing rich conversations to be dynamically generated based on the player's history together in the game so far.
Another way we try and give players a new experience every time they play Left 4 Dead is that in addition to randomly placing bonus items like pain pills and pipe bombs, we vary the location of the more powerful weapons: the auto shotgun, the assault rifle, and the hunting rifle. These weapons will always appear somewhere in the main path, but there are 4 different areas in the subway station where they can spawn. This means that players can't take these positions for granted on repeated playthroughs, and must keep their eyes open for the weapon upgrades.
I'll try this rifle. Reloading. Reloading.
Although it sounds ridiculous to talk about advanced zombie AI, we spent a great deal of time on the AI systems for the common horde. First and foremost is their ability to navigate. The environments in Left 4 Dead are geometrically complex and littered with breakable and movable objects. One of the design goals for the zombie horde was that there can never be a place where a survivor can stand that a zombie cannot navigate to. To make this happen required not only robust pathfinding code, but also path-following algorithms as well. These path followers have to continuously evaluate the local geometry around them and decide whether to crouch, stand, jump, climb over, and otherwise navigate nearly arbitrary environmental obstacles.
There's a pipe bomb here!
This covered body is an example of how we tell a story in the levels without using any words or overt storytelling. We wanted to show that there are other people in the world that are survivors like you. We figured most people wouldn't survive very long and you'd come across their bodies, but we needed a way to set these apart from all the dead ragdolls of the common infected. By simply covering a body with a blanket or a sheet, it becomes really obvious that this guy had a buddy, a friend, and when he went down, his friend had compassion and covered him up. This also tells a story about the state of the world, that they wouldn't want to go out and bury the body. They couldn't expose themselves to infected. So they'd have the bodies right there with them, but covered. Sometimes you'll see a covered body right outside a checkpoint. So it's like they were in a safe area, and maybe during the night their buddy died from his wounds. So the next morning, the other survivors didn't really want the body in there with them, so they dragged it outside. This was the best they could do for the guy.
Smoking the set is a common film technique used to help separate background and foreground elements. We use particles and distance-based fog to do our own version of smoking. Our first experiments proved frustrating for players. We used a realistic dark fog, but this obscured character silhouettes and gave no sense of the vast surrounding environment. Once we lightened up the fog, the maps gained a greater sense of scale and distance, and the readability of characters greatly improved, so the players could more easily tell friend from foe. Fog also helped players spot important events, like zombies climbing over distant fences. So changes in visual design not only improved the look of the maps, but aided players in anticipating and coordinating their team ahead of attacks.
Reloading!
Early playtesting revealed that players often didn't know that other survivors were in need of help, even though the status of the other survivors at the bottom of the screen changed to red. When being attacked by a horde of zombies, we found players focusing exclusively on the in-game action and missing any changes to the HUD and the other player's status. We solved this problem by using glows around the silhouettes of the survivors' character models. We use red glows when other survivors are in need of assistance, and blue glows to show the survivor's location when hidden behind walls or far away.
In Left 4 Dead, players carry flashlights to illuminate the environment. These shadow-casting light sources not only add surface richness and provide important visual depth cues, they tie into gameplay. For example, because a player's flashlight is attached to his or her weapon, the light becomes pointed off to the side when reloading or performing a shove attack. In a sufficiently dark area, this can cause the player to be effectively blind until they are done reloading or shoving back an enemy. Like so many of Left 4 Dead's game mechanics, this encourages cooperation, as players know they may be left in the dark if they choose to reload at the wrong moment.
Before there were rescue closets, survivors who died during the game had to wait until the next checkpoint before they could rejoin. As the game matured, the time between checkpoints reached 10 to 15 minutes, clearly too long for a player to sit in spectator mode. Although it may seem obvious now, it wasn't really clear how to bring dead survivors back into the game in a simple and believable way. Once we hit on the mechanic that you're rescuing a survivor who has barricaded himself in, the problem was solved. This solution is typical of Left 4 Dead game mechanics. Hearing a trapped friend call for help creates a dramatic situation for the survivors and creates a new short-term goal for the team to accomplish. Also, finding a lone survivor that joins your team is a staple of the horror movie genre. Finally, it provides plenty of opportunities throughout the environment to bring dead players back into the game.
We set out to create an interesting trade-off between the pipe bomb and the Molotov from day one. Given the limit of a single item in your inventory, the choice needed to be meaningful. From early on, the Molotov was a clear winner, providing a dynamic area of denial with interesting strategic purposes and pitfalls, especially against the boss infected. The pipe bomb was intended to provide a balance against a rampaging horde, but initially it proved far less successful. Given the frenetic pace of enemies in action in Left 4 Dead, with typical engagement ranges of 5 to 10 feet, using a traditional pipe bomb in any sort of intentional way was nearly impossible. You'd see a mob of zombies, whip out the pipe bomb, and by the time you were winding up for a throw, they'd already be eating your face. No amount of tweaks to the detonation mechanic or timing solved this issue. It simply wasn't fun. Given that the horde is drawn to shrill, high-pitched sounds, we decided to take the homemade nature of the pipe bomb one step further and attach the guts of a smoke detector onto it. This provided just the element that the weapon needed. Against mobs, you now have the ability to draw them to a point and destroy them. It has the strategic advantage of being able to deflect an incoming rush from a user or a teammate who's being overwhelmed, and rarely feels like a wasted opportunity when used. Now when presented with a pipe bomb and Molotov trade-off, you have to weigh what situation you're more worried about facing next, and how the rest of your team is outfitted. The mechanics of the weapon help to reinforce fictional elements within the world while falling in line and fulfilling our initial goals for its purpose. And seeing a bunch of zombies turn into goopy red mist as the result of a big explosion never hurts either.
Crescendo events were the result of a lot of playtesting. Playtesters really love the finales, but since it can take like an hour or so to get to each one, they were missing these kinds of intense experiences along the way. What playtesters liked most about the finale was that it was the one time they were able to stop, catch a breath, make plans, and set up traps for the infected. During the rest of the campaign, you're always on the run, reacting to the infected and trying to move forward. So these crescendo events came out of wanting to get more of that planning and strategy into the rest of the campaign. These events also helped a bunch with team building. Like the minigun is really important, and if no one's manning it, your team probably won't do too well. But the minigunner is really vulnerable. They have a limited angle of view, they can't watch their backs anymore, so they have to depend on their teammates to cover them. With crescendo events on the way to the finale, we not only vary the pacing, but we help build the skills and coordination that will enable teams to survive the ultimate battle at the finale.
At one point in the development process, playtesters told us that with the exception of the finale maps, they found the experience of going through a campaign fairly flat, with not enough peak moments. So we decided to mix up the gameplay by creating crescendo events. This generator room was one of the first maps where we tried one of these events. To proceed from this room, the survivors must turn on the power to open this door, which attracts a large horde of the infected. These crescendo events create multiple peak moments that vary the pace and intensity of the campaign, ultimately building up to the finale.
One distinguishing characteristic about Lewis is that he represents the everyday man. While Bill and Francis are characters who obviously live on the outskirts of society, Lewis is really the only one in the group who looks like he's trying to hold on to aspects of normalcy and civilization in a world of utter chaos. Designing a sleek-fitted silhouette and adding detail elements such as designer shoes, necktie, and a designer watch not only distinguishes his character from the rest of the group, but also gives the player insight into who Lewis was prior to the apocalypse.
bomb over here.
Lighting was one of our toughest challenges. We had to find a light level that was atmospheric without striking players as frustrating or unfair. Wherever possible, we let lighting tell the story and enhance the gameplay. Playtests proved that in a dark game, players will go wherever there's light. All we had to do was set up a few critical lights, and players are drawn to them like a moth to a bug zapper. This simplified lighting also made it easier to read silhouettes, so that players could more easily tell survivors from infected. And the car headlights proved to be one of our most flexible props, casting long dramatic shadows that tell a story of abandonment, while being easily positioned to lead the survivors where we want them to go.
Usually, each model in the game has its own unique texture maps painted specifically for that model, which give the object its surface colors and detail. To have a convincing variety of cars using this method would have required as many textures as varieties of car, plus multiple duplicates of the textures in different colors, which would have been far out of our allotted texture memory budget. So we had to find a more efficient way to bring about the same result. For example, the texture on this car is shared with 3 different car models distributed throughout the environment. In addition to this one color texture, there is also a mask texture that allows each instance of the car's painted surfaces to be tinted a different color without having to author a separate texture. So for the cost of 2 textures, you can get 4 different car models in an unlimited variety of colors.
Along with the boomer, the tank was one of our earliest bosses. Where the boomer broke the rule of shoot everything that moves, the tank changed the team's tactics to require immediate and direct cooperation against a single major threat. If everyone stays calm and engages the tank, they should be okay. If they panic and scatter, or if someone gets selfish and runs off, the team will likely die. One difficulty with the tank was that since we offset his incredible toughness by slowing him down a bit, when tank battles occurred in large outdoor spaces, he was far less effective. Coordinated survivor teams could easily take down the tank before he would close in on them and cause chaos. To offset this vulnerability, we added his rock throw and car slugging abilities. Now, if the tank finds himself far away from the survivors, he can still be effective by ripping up the ground and lobbing huge rocks at them.
One of the film techniques we relied on was color correction. Color correction simplifies and unifies the visual palette. Our color correction allows us to set a specific saturation threshold below which everything falls off towards gray, while critical items like health packs and blood stay bright and eye-catching. We also vary color correction by area. For instance, safe rooms have a warm color quality, evoking safety, in distinct contrast to the cooler palettes of the outdoors, which feel cold and forbidding.
Ready for some fun?
Initially, designers placed the spawn locations for common infected mobs in each map. However, it became obvious after a few playthroughs that skilled survivors knew exactly where each of these were, killing the atmosphere of anticipation and constant danger. To address this, we tried creating sets of these mob generators and randomizing which sets were active for a given session. This helped somewhat, but ultimately it meant that experienced survivor teams would just have to check a few more known locations. Since a primary design goal of Left 4 Dead was to create an experience that could be replayed indefinitely, we needed a new approach. We decided to go for the ideal but riskier solution, a completely procedural approach that would determine where to create mobs on the fly as the team was playing. Although it took longer to build this system, in the end it worked better than we even hoped. Not only were experienced teams no longer able to expect where mobs would hit, but the process of populating maps with enemies was hugely simplified. What used to take weeks of painful iteration and constant updating as maps were changed became a 5-minute process that was much more tolerant of map changes and actually played better. It was so successful, in fact, that we can't imagine building Left 4 Dead without a system for this kind of procedural content. We later expanded this system to add wandering zombies to the environments to increase the survivors' tactical choices and add additional variety to the game experience. Once this design decision was made, these wanderers were added to every map in the game with just an afternoon's worth of code from a single programmer. We play-tested the idea that very same day.
Network bandwidth usage when playing Left 4 Dead is a huge concern. We're constantly looking for ways to reduce how much data the server needs to send to each of the players. In most of our multiplayer games, we're only concerned with other players and their projectiles and weapons. But in Left 4 Dead, we must update not only the behavior of other players, but those of a horde of infected. In the hospital campaign, a lot of the surfaces are flat, such as halls and roadways. By making sure the infected only send their height when it changes, instead of giving complete position updates, we shaved almost 10% of the bandwidth from the server.
Reloading.
The process behind designing Zoe's character wasn't as straightforward as the other three. Developing a young female in a zombie apocalypse isn't easy with a backstory like hers. She had to be attractive and worn down at the same time. She needed to be tough and able to hold her own, even though she's occasionally terrified. Her readability was also something we had to take into consideration. A bright red jacket solved the problem. It pops out amongst the gritty, desaturated zombies and the dark, subdued environment. As far as the rest of her appearance, there was a little bit of back and forth as her character came into focus through iteration. Finally, we were certain that the character model met our goals, and Zoe unfolded into an everyday young woman who everyone can relate to.
Our first maps created specifically for the game were giant non-linear city sections. The idea was that the survivor team would have to find their way through the zombie-infested city. Playtesting quickly revealed that keeping track of your teammates and fending off the hordes of zombies completely consumed players' attention. Adding on-the-fly discussions of which way to go were slow and frustrating. More importantly, however, was that the teams quickly found their favorite route and tended to always run the same way every time, minimizing their on-the-fly decisions. By paring down the city to a representative and fairly linear route, we could better spend our limited resources, making that area highly detailed.
Originally, the survivor's path forced them through a gas station convenience store and out by these pumps. Due to the path, many players accidentally shot the pumps from close proximity, leading to a premature and seemingly unfair end to their survivor experience. Through a cycle of playtesting and iteration, we ultimately arrived at this layout, which preserved both the life of the player and the spectacle of the gas station detonating.
This loading dock was another arena that we designated for our mini-finale. This time, instead of locking the survivors in a defensive position, we decided to have them ride the lift up to a rooftop encounter with the horde.
Based on the success of procedurally populating the world with wanderers and mobs, we decided to try to guarantee a consistent dramatic experience for the survivors. Through playtesting, we observed sessions where some survivor teams would occasionally get into a downward spiral of being overwhelmed to the point that they were never able to regroup and get ahead. This was partially due to some poor choices of the survivor players and varying skill levels, but also due to the luck of the draw with the procedural population system. A random streak of bad dice rolls would either be incredibly exciting for some teams or a death sentence for others. To address this, we created a system that tracks each survivor's stress level by watching for events like how much damage are you taking, how many zombies have you killed near you, and so on. If a survivor's stress level gets too high, the system will step in and forcibly throttle back the zombie population system to make sure the team gets a break every now and then. These breaks are critical for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is battle fatigue. Constant fighting and gunfire is tiring. Secondly, the team needs an end to these skirmishes along the way to give them a chance to regroup, heal, and reassess. Lastly, these big exciting battles are only exciting if there are also periods of quiet, creepy, tension, and anticipation to contrast them against. This dramatic pacing is really critical to creating a fun experience. Once this system was in place, we realized we had all this useful information on how the survivor team is actually doing. From a dramatic standpoint, ideally we want to see the survivor team just make it into the next checkpoint, limping in, being chased by the horde, so they can celebrate when the door closes and they yell, "We made it."
Hurry!
I got your signal.
Reloading!
One film technique we brought to Left 4 Dead was the idea of grain. Film grain is most apparent in dark scenes, which made it an attractive visual effect for our game. Grain does a good job of implying detail in darkness, adding grittiness and texture. However, we found in playtesting that if we applied grain uniformly, people would quickly tire of the effect. We hit upon a method for dynamically varying the grain effect based on light level. Scenes range from grainy texture in darkness and shadows to no grain at all in the brightest spots.
Reloading!
Knock it off!
Left 4 Dead was created with the goal of being replayable. This goal causes a problem for writing, where characters will have the same speech opportunity multiple times over a single session. So we have to avoid having the speech become repetitive. We do that in multiple ways. One is to have almost all the speech have a random element to when it plays. This stops the player from being able to tune out the speech because it is expected for a certain action. We successfully tested this on Team Fortress 2 and have expanded on that system. In Left 4 Dead, not only does the initial speech have a random element, but we also have follow-up lines that may or may not play after the initial line, randomizing the speech opportunity further. We also limit how often some lines play. No matter how witty or funny a line is, you're sick of it the 100th time you hear it in an hour-long play session. To address this, our vocalization system allows us to control the rarity of individual lines or even complete speech opportunities. For instance, a speech opportunity may only fire if you are playing the character Bill and Zoe is healing you and she has just healed you a few minutes earlier. This type of randomization based on combination of criteria help make the speech seem natural and avoid having the player hear it too often.
For much of the development of Left 4 Dead, versus mode was the default and only mode. Balance problems eventually forced us to make it a separate game type. The problem was that if we balanced it to provide the survivors a reasonable chance of escape, the experience was a long and frustrating one for the player zombies. Changes that were necessary to make the player zombie experience satisfying also served to make the experience dramatically harder for the survivors. Separating versus mode allowed us to break out of this dilemma. Rather than aiming for a 50-50 shot at the survivors escaping, now we're aiming for a shorter, more intense experience, where the survivors are unlikely to make it to the end. The goal is simply to get further than the other team did. It's more fun for the zombies, and your reward for having a harder time as the survivors is that you get to switch teams after you're slaughtered and do the same to them.
Let's get moving.
I'm here.
This ladder, from day one, has always been a really exciting place in the campaign, because it forces the team to separate a bit, and players can't shoot while they're on the ladder. If a team's in great shape, they just fly through this area. But if the team is really hurting, everyone will stop and look at each other to see who has the most health. That guy will generally go up first, because chances are there's going to be infected up there. It's not always the case, but often enough that whoever goes up first is going to take a bit of a beating. The witch is much rarer than the boomer, and her penalty is much more severe. Basically, if you shoot the witch, you will likely die. The witch has two functions. One is to provide an exception to the rule of shoot everything that moves. The primary function of the witch, however, is to force a change of pace on the survivor team. Ideally, discovering a witch near your path will result in the team going into stealth mode, shutting off their flashlights and walking carefully around her to not disturb her. This is a large departure from the intense and loud pace of normal gameplay. In earlier versions of the witch's behavior, she was far more dangerous. Once she was set off, she went berserk and attacked all of the survivors until she was killed. This proved to be too harsh, particularly for teams of new players. One stray bullet could wake the witch, and she would slay the entire team, ending the game. Now she limits her wrath to the survivor who harassed her. If she successfully kills that player, she retreats from the scene entirely.
Valve has a long history of gathering real-world gameplay data and using that to improve our products. In Left 4 Dead, we automatically gather data from internal playtests and use that to tune the game. We look at every angle, including things like how often survivors help each other, how effective different types of infected are, how effective weapons are, and which weapons players favor. We learn a lot from analyzing gameplay data, and it lets us make decisions based on real information rather than guesswork. We will gather that same gameplay data from our real-world Left 4 Dead players and use that information to continue to improve the game. We'll also share the gameplay data we gather with the community as we do with our other products.
I'm reloading. Reloading.
Since killing zombies is such a big part of this game, we invested a lot of time into making their death animations more dramatic than simple ragdolls. We had a professional stuntman on a motion capture stage perform about 100 different dying animations from different kinds of weapons and hit from different directions, like from the front or behind. We then combined these mocap animations with the physics-driven ragdolls. The result is a really cinematic experience, with zombies that stumble for a few steps into a wall, then slide down the wall and collapse, for example. It's the best of both worlds.
We took several steps to keep the music interesting enough that the players would be inclined to keep it on as they play, and keep it changing so it won't become tedious. To this end, we created a music director that runs alongside the AI director, tracking the player's experience rather than their emotional state. We keep the music appropriate to each player's situation and highly personalized. The music engine in Left 4 Dead has a complete client-side multi-track system per player that is completely unique to that player and can even be monitored by the spectators. Since some of the fun of Left 4 Dead is watching your friends when you're dead, we thought it was important to hear their personal soundtrack as well. This feature is unique to Left 4 Dead.
In Left 4 Dead, players are constantly getting attacked by mobs of common infected, and have lots of opportunities to view individual infecteds up close. Playtesters tend to notice and remember the variety of faces and clothing of the different types of common infected, and it helped to reinforce the sense of a vast epidemic. It was a challenge to create this diversity of looks for common infected and take advantage of unique clothing or uniforms in specific areas without blowing our model and texture memory budgets. We came up with a system of marking navigation areas to spawn specific populations of infected. Each population type defines probabilities for which common infected versions can be spawned. For instance, lots of TSA agents are spawned in the airport, hospital patients around the hospital, cops in the streets, office employees in the offices, etc. We also paid special attention to infected heads and upper bodies, because playtesters were noticing those parts of common infected the most. By randomly selecting from a lot of small head textures packed in a single texture sheet, using random tint colors for clothing materials, and using random body groups for infected bodies, we could generate over 1,500 different looks for common infected.
The idea that a bad decision by one player directly impacts the whole team is central to the design of Left 4 Dead. It is emotionally very powerful to know that you need your teammates to succeed, and to have clear and visceral feedback that you just made a mistake that is going to cost the team dearly. Examples include shooting a boomer that explodes on a friend, causing a horde of zombies to attack him, causing the witch to attack, which usually means someone is going to die, throwing a bad Molotov and burning your friends to a crisp, shooting a car alarm, causing all hell to break loose, running away and leaving your team incapacitated and dying, and of course, shooting your friend in the back as he was limping into the safe house, incapacitating him while the horde is hot on your heels. These kind of actions may not actually end your game, but your friends will certainly let you know just how they feel about it.
Reloading. Weapons here! I'm reloading.
Reloading!
I'm reloading.
A lot of overreaching dynamic music systems go to great lengths to organize and control a very expressive art form, often to the point of making the results perfectly controlled, but also perfectly boring. Our music director aims for planned serendipity,
By designing the music and rule sets to increase the probability of beautiful happenstance and to minimize the probability of inappropriate mistakes, we end up with the highest percentage of musical events working as planned, a nice mid-percentage of acceptably artful mistakes, and very few actual poor moments. If you over-design the music and rule sets, there are no surprises, and without surprises, listeners are quickly bored. Ironically, by keeping things simple, the music seems planned. Greater complexity just leads to greater randomness and many more poor moments.
One of our goals when designing the 4 survivors was to have a very diverse group of real-world characters who fit in the post-apocalyptic storyline, but that also have heroic and aspirational qualities. Bill was a challenging design problem when it came to finding the correct balance between realism and idealism. In our first attempts, we made him look a bit too old and frail, which made him seem physically incapable of fighting against the Horde. On later iterations, we erred on the side of making him look too young and handsome, which broke the fiction that we had for the character. In our final design, we balanced the character backstory and the aspirational qualities, portraying Bill as a once heroic army veteran, who though older and wiser, can still excel at physical combat.
The crescendo event centered on this elevator has a very simple mechanic: survive until the elevator arrives. In order to distinguish it from other crescendo events, we added breakable walls that allowed the Horde to smash through, surprising the survivors and providing access for them to attack from all directions.
We base the music on what the player is actually experiencing and not on what we want them to experience. Working from artificial life work our audio designers had done on Lord of the Rings and the Matrix sequels, we implemented a simple system to examine what's going on in the player's immediate environment, then added the appropriate reactive scalar rule sets to control the music and its volume levels. Most of the more prominent musical cues are thus reactive results from rule sets processing this input, making the musical experience specific to each player. This system also controls the dynamic mix system, another feature unique to Left 4 Dead.
I ain't gonna let these goddamn vampires beat me. They're zombies, Francis. Whatever. Ready?
Another dialogue feature added for Left 4 Dead is the ability for characters to dynamically notice and comment upon objects in their world. In other Source games, we could write explicit scenes for supporting characters to act out at certain points in the world, but in Left 4 Dead, we can never be sure which survivors will actually be alive at any given moment. So, the game considers which characters are present and their condition before automatically choosing the best available conversation that includes whoever is around.
I'm reloading.
The first version of this area didn't have any openings on the walls at all. Everything was closed off.
We decided that since we were so high up in the hospital and there wasn't any real geometry below, that we could add windows and use 3D skybox to provide this great vista. Once we put windows in, sometimes the hunter attack would push you out of the window. It became scary to get by those windows, and once we realized how much fun it was to get near the risky area, we decided to open up this level as much as possible. So all the walls around the extensive level were just removed entirely. We've got a bunch of areas where some of the props and debris in the environment force you to walk even closer to the edge than you might want to.
Given all the rooftops in the game, we saw Survivor falling off a lot, and it wasn't much fun. Player would make it all the way up here, heading for a checkpoint, and then a zombie would come around the corner, and they'd back right off the edge of the building and fall. We wanted to give them a second chance, and in the process encourage the cooperative type of gameplay we were aiming for. So we came up with the idea of having them grab the ledge and hang there until a teammate helped them.
We should probably go. Reloading. We need to get moving.
You call this a zombie apocalypse? Don't hold a candle to the great zombie attack of '57.
What?
Horseshit.
What do you say? Ready?
Guys, hurry!
Don't worry, I got your back.
Nice. Lead on. I'm with you. Watch my back, please. Nothing to see here, folks. Cover me.
Now to the road.
In playtests, people were often confused by certain events and elements in the game. The addition of musical cues helped distinguish these events and diminish player confusion. This was similar to the way that we experimented with distinct visual silhouettes in order to make our characters stand out in a chaotic environment. Audio silhouettes work on a preconscious level and are rarely perceived as intentional.
During our internal playtesting, we ran into situations where a player who had a habit of making bad decisions kept becoming incapacitated to the point where the other survivors became frustrated, continually reviving and escorting this player 5 or 6 times in the space of a couple of minutes. Adding the third strike in your dead rule solved this issue two ways. First, it temporarily took these players out of the game and allowed the rest of the team to proceed and enjoy their experience. Second, the players who died found themselves as a spectator watching the more successful players. This not only gave them the opportunity to learn how the remaining players were surviving, but how they might improve their own performance as well. It also let them cool off and regain their composure in preparation for rejoining the game a minute or so later.
Players need to learn from their mistakes as quickly as possible. In early versions of Left 4 Dead, if survivors failed a campaign at any point, we just put them right back at the beginning and made them play the whole thing over again. That meant that if the team dies in the last level, it'll be close to 45 minutes before they ever get back to that map to try something new. This made it hard for players to remember exactly what they'd done wrong, and so it was hard for them to decide what they might want to do differently. So now, when a team goes down, we just reset to the beginning of the level that they died on. This gives them a lot more freedom and flexibility in how they approach the most challenging sections.
Come on, let's go.
All the music in Left 4 Dead, themes, motifs, hits, and effects, are based on a hybrid scale derived from the main opening menu theme. This theme, representing the near death of humanity as it fades to a distance only to be accessed through a radio, is an incremental melodic modulation collecting up all the notes used along the way. The scale is not absolute, and some notes outside the scale are used occasionally to achieve even greater dissonance. But by using the singular and very chromatic scale, almost any piece written in it will generally dovetail pretty decently with any other. At the very least, the pieces seem to spring from the same musical universe. The resulting tunes are deceptively complex, easy to remember but difficult to sing accurately.
When players are moving through the world in a panic and trying to coordinate with their team, the last thing you want them to worry about is which key lets them crouch so they can scramble into a vent. Throughout the game, we tried to simplify movement controls so that players could enjoy the terror of the experience with as little frustration as possible. Here, and at similar obstacles, we make the survivor crouch automatically when they come to a vent. Wherever possible, we try to keep these decisions invisible to players, to keep the illusion that they're moving through this frightening world on instinct without ever thinking about controls.
Finally, you see that? We're almost out of here.
The hospital rooftop is the finale that saw the most iterations. It's the first one that we ever built. The initial design had the survivors inside of a building with the helipad outside. You would fight inside the building till help arrived, and then you'd go out to the helipad to escape. We found that it was too easy for the survivors to back into a small room and hold out, just shooting the infected as they came through the doorway. This killed the drama because we'd have hundreds of infected attacking the rooftop, but you'd never see them, only the trickle that got through the doorway. We learned through playtests that survivors have a natural tendency to climb up on things. It's like the infected are a flood, and survivors are always trying to get to high ground. So we played to that tendency, building rooftop areas that were easily accessible where the survivors could navigate from one roof to another. Knowing that survivors want to get to high ground, we can anticipate how they'll approach the map, and we can design around that. For example, the infected can scale rooftops from all sides so the survivors can never back into a corner where they're safe. As a bonus, survivors get to actually see the infected running at them from a long distance away, which is a lot more dramatic than shooting at them as they pile through a doorway.
Left 4 Dead was originally going to have a continuous story that started with the hospital campaign. When the chopper pilot picked you up, he would start talking about how he had just done a street pickup and wasn't feeling so well. Clearly he had just been infected, and the chopper was about to go down. We found that this left playtesters feeling let down, instead of rewarded for having survived the challenging campaign. We decided to cut that section of the pilot's dialogue and kept the ending upbeat, reinforcing the player's sense of accomplishment.
Highly cooperative and experienced survivor team can become very good at staying together and watching all around them, to the point that it becomes difficult for the zombie to cut the kind of chaos and panic that makes the game exciting. The smoker was created to forcibly pull this tag team apart. Moving to the one survivor far out position with a smoker tongue attack proved to be enough to break things up and bring the chaos back.
While special effects seem on the surface to be visual fluff, they also serve critical gameplay functions. To use an example of the smoker, we can see how his various effects follow his design. The role of the smoker is to keep his distance, lurking on rooftops, trees, and other out-of-the-way spots to pull a survivor out of formation and break up the group. As such, unlike other types of infected, he prefers to keep his distance from the survivors. In order to give him a distinct and visible silhouette in the often dark and distant locales that he frequents, he has a swarming spore cloud. We use a variety of small techniques here to help guarantee a strong read in all situations. The spores themselves are lit by the local lighting, but always maintain some degree of color so that the smoker retains some distinct visibility even in complete darkness. Further, we apply a technique we also use in a variety of feedback-based effects such as blood and impacts, where the particles have a minimal screen space size regardless of their distance. This allows the smoker to retain his distinctive effect at far distances or when silhouetted against the sky, while keeping the actual particle sizes small when up close. Since the smoker is usually dealt with at a distance, often at angles which make getting a shot difficult, his death must also be clearly broadcast to players so that they can tell when they've killed him. This is where the smoker's moniker comes into play. When he is killed, he releases a large smoke cloud, which is not only a visual payoff for killing the smoker, but a clear read that he has been defeated and won't escape to attack again. His cloud also serves as a final act of revenge, obscuring nearby players' visibility as well as hiding infected within.
The tank is an awesome presence on the battlefield. It's the only zombie that can withstand any amount of direct fire. To successfully combat a tank, the survivors need to work together and focus on their target, and even then the chance of catastrophe is high. With all of this power, it's a huge reward when a player gets to play the tank. We wanted to create something that rewarded player performance, so it would feel fair, but we also wanted to make sure that it didn't generate a feedback loop, where one player would always end up being the tank. Often when trying to solve a game design problem like this, it's good to look at mechanisms that exist outside of the gaming world that solve the same problems. That way our players will instantly understand the mechanism at play, and we can tap into the same excitement that might already exist for the external mechanism. The tank raffle has the added benefit of announcing to the player zombies when the tank is created, and piquing anticipation for the most exciting part of the game.
In early playtests, when players controlled the tank, we had a major problem with them not behaving in character, totally breaking the game balance of the tank and making him a game ender almost every time. The problem was that an intelligent human player wants to win right now, and the tank was designed to be an enraged berserker that just charges in and starts smashing stuff. Having a tank that can take tons of damage, has an incredibly powerful melee attack, and is smart, hides in choke points, and stays in cover constantly, as a smart human does, was a huge problem. One choice was simply to not allow the tank to be human controlled and to leave it to the AI to drive its behaviors consistently. With that as our fallback, we worked on trying to find a behavior modifier that would encourage human players to act in a more tank-like way. Eventually, we settled on a fairly simple solution, the patience meter. When a human becomes a tank, he has a certain amount of patience, which is shown graphically on his HUD. This patience wears down whenever he can't see the survivors. If the tank's patience runs out, the player loses control of the tank AI and he returns to spectator mode. This allows the player to decide how to engage the survivors, but makes it clear that he needs to get in and start swinging or he'll lose his turn. By making this behavior contract clear to the player, we get the kind of tank behavior we need, and human players get to enjoy causing total chaos as the biggest, baddest boss in the game.
We knew we wanted homemade weaponry for Left 4 Dead, and a pipe bomb seemed ideal. However, for a long time the pipe bomb wasn't very fun. We tried various things, such as having a pipe bomb kill a tank. That certainly made the pipe bomb valuable, but instead of being exciting, it made the tank battle anticlimactic. We also tried making the explosion radius much larger, but the instant explosion made it difficult to time perfectly to be effective against a mob rush. In the final months of development, one of the animators suggested the pipe bomb having a beeping, flashing light that attracted zombies. That added the missing fun element, an interesting and useful tactical choice for the survivor. We prototyped this new pipe bomb behavior, and it was an instant success. There are definitely situations where you want a Molotov, but now that choice is harder to make because both are useful and fun.
Because teamwork is so important to gameplay in Left 4 Dead, we wanted to give players feedback on how they and their teammates were working as a team. The first version of this was something we called awards, which is basically a large collection of positive and negative player actions. It was like having merits and demerits. Awards showed up as icons in the HUD, and everyone could see what awards other people on the team were receiving. This turned out to be too complex and confusing. It was hard to decipher what the icons meant, and the negative awards just hurt the feelings of new players rather than educating them. Also, with so much activity going on in the game, it was hard to notice the award icons at the time the good teamwork occurred. In the next version, we drastically narrowed the list to just a few positive things a player can do, replaced the icons with very short text, and added a glow to the player icon in the HUD. This had the desired effect of reinforcing good teamwork right when it occurred and broadcasting the player's good deeds to his teammates.
While there are hundreds of infected types mobbing the player in Left 4 Dead, there are only 4 survivors. To make sure these 4 stood up to close scrutiny over many hours of playtime, we decided to use photographic reference of faces and wardrobe details. We started out by casting 4 individuals who fit the general design concepts we had created for our characters. These models were photographed on a turntable under both flat and dynamic lighting conditions in order to provide reference for modelers and texture artists. In addition, each model was photographed in a custom-built mirror box, which allows us to capture simultaneous front, right, left, top, and bottom views in a single shot. The talent was guided through a matrix of facial expressions, creating a complete catalog of movements and expressions for each character's face. This is an invaluable resource for our modelers and animators when they start to recreate these expressions in 3-dimensional models.
Because Left 4 Dead is designed to be played over and over again, we made the dialogue scenes have as many variants as we could cram in. For instance, the encounter with the crazy church guy halfway through the Death Toll campaign includes more than 130 lines spread across 5 characters that can play out about 25 different ways. Variations appear based on which survivor initially uses the door, what other survivors are near that survivor, and random chance. The end result is that players can go through the encounter many times without hearing the same conversation twice.
Early in the design of this rooftop scenario, the finale would start as soon as someone hit the radio button. We saw playtesters consistently run up and hit the button without preparing for the battle first. To let players know that they needed to prepare and to give them time to do it, we changed the design so that the pilot tells them to call him back when they're ready.
You made it! All you need to do is hold out until I get there. But first, you need to prepare. There should be a mounted gun and other supplies to help you hold out. No way I can land unless you are ready. Call me back once you're prepared. News Chopper 5 out.
From the start, focusing on cooperation was a primary design goal of Left 4 Dead. Although other games support cooperative play, extremely few actually require it. There are many core game mechanics in our game that require cooperation to succeed. One of the first that we added was having your character collapse to the ground, incapacitated and unable to move when your health reaches 0. You continue to lose health in this state, and the zombies will continue to attack you. Once you're incapacitated, you will die unless a friend helps you back to your feet. Reviving an incapacitated friend takes 5 seconds, so it is a risky investment, as the rescuer is vulnerable and unable to defend himself during this time.
Traditional vignetting is a term from photography which refers to the slight darkening of the periphery of a photograph. In our vignetting approach, we darken only the top edge and corners. This focuses player attention down into the middle of the play space where it belongs, while also creating a sense of oppression or claustrophobia. This is a great example of how a visual enhancement can have a positive effect on the overall game experience as well.
this gun up here!
Don't shoot me!
The tank is an awesome presence on
In early playtest,
While there are
Early in the